We are a part of the Mental Health News Radio Network.
You've tuned in to Rescue the Rescuer, the show that focuses on helping first responders who may be experiencing challenges such as addiction, PTSD, relationship failure, and more. We use stories of struggle and recovery to highlight successful survival strategies for those in this powerfully stressful field of work. And now, here's your host, Steven Kavalkovich.
Hey everyone, this is Steven. Thanks for joining me on the show. I'm a former paramedic in long-term recovery from addiction and post-traumatic stress disorder. I've created this podcast to help others who may be experiencing a story similar to mine find a path beyond their problems and towards a life that they deserve. Before we get started with today's episode, let's hear this short message from one of my supporters. I recently read an article that said 81% of Americans would like to become a published author. Chances are you might be one of them, right? I know I am. So what's stopping us? Writing and publishing a book takes a lot of work, can be a pain, and is expensive too, right? Not anymore. For my next book project, I've teamed up with Hassle-Free Books. They're making it easy for me to become an author. They're removing a lot of the fuss and struggle and making it smooth and simple. And it's far more affordable than you could ever imagine. Go to hasslefreebooks.com and use promo code RESCUE to receive a 10% discount off any book project. Get started right away and become a published author in as little as 45 days. That's hasslefreebooks.com. Promo code RESCUE. All right, thanks again for joining me, and let's get started with today's show. Welcome back to Rescue the Rescuer. So, on today's episode, I have a really great special guest that I'm really excited to have share his interesting story and the opportunity that he's offering for people to gain access to healing through what he's doing. So, I'm going to let him tell it. But today I have Dan Willis on the show. He's served over 30 years as a police officer, retiring as captain from the Mesa Police Department near San Diego, California. He's a graduate of the FBI National Academy, a former crimes of violence, child molestation, homicide detective, and SWAT Commander, and is taught at the San Diego Police Academy for 12 years. He's also the author of the book, The Emotional Survival and Wellness Guidebook, Bulletproof Spirit, the first responder's essential resource for protecting and healing mind and heart. He travels the country providing emotional survival training for first responders. So, Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Steve. It's my pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you. And, I wanted to just give a shout out and thank you for sending me the book so quickly. I regret to inform you I haven't finished it because I only got it just about a week ago, I guess. But I really, really like the topics you're discussing and the approach that you're taking as far as helping first responders basically deal with life and the issues of life and the impact that the job sometimes has, life stressors, and even things that happen long before they ever put a uniform on. So I'm going to let you share it. Give me a little bit, I know I shared in the bio a little bit of your background, but if you want to elaborate on that and then maybe get into what motivated you to start attacking this very, very important topic when it comes to first responders?
Sure. I was 21 years old when I put myself through the police academy. Very idealistic. I had wanted to be a police officer for many years as I was growing up, wanting to help people and stand up to evil and protect and give life to people and all that stuff. And when I graduated from the academy in 1985, I had absolutely no idea what's really in store, for not just police officers, but any first responders. I mean, they teach us the laws and the procedures and everything and tell us to stay physically fit. but there really wasn't any training at all. And sadly, today it's still very rare to have emotional survival and wellness training. So, I had no idea as being this young kid going out and seeing, all the different ways that the kids get molested and that people kill themselves and all the senseless violence and the danger and just everything else. Just really each bad call tended to eat away at that idealism and my desire to care and to really want to make a difference, because you're just trying to get through, one bad call after the other, day after day, year after year. And the things that we experience as first responders really are poisonous to our spirit, and they're cumulative, very, very toxic. And we're typically the last ones to know how we're changing over the years. I certainly was. I'm divorced, and I think a big reason for that was not knowing how I was changing over the years. This job has a inherent ability to turn us into someone our loved ones don't recognize anymore. And before you know it, you're one of these officers or a fireman, maybe a paramedic who just doesn't care anymore, is indifferent, is angry, bitter, jaded, calloused, frustrated, all those emotions, negative emotions that I've seen in myself early on in the career and so many of my colleagues. The post-traumatic stress, there's 1 in 5 police officers are suffering from PTSD, and most of them have no idea what they have. They just know they can't sleep anymore. They can't get these images out of their head. They can't return to being normal and feeling normal anymore, and they think they're losing their mind. I mean, suicide is still the number 1 cause of death every year. And just through my career, I saw how it affected me and so many of my colleagues. And that's where I really became interested of thinking, okay, what can we do? Instead of just hoping for the best and allowing the job to victimize us and our families, what can we do that's proactive day in and day out to help insulate us, to help bulletproof our spirit, to help us remain motivated and inspired to want to be the good and do good and to help people and make a positive difference in people's lives. So that's kind of the whole impetus for me writing the book. It has over 40 proactive emotional survival strategies and things that any first responder can practice, day in and day out to help counteract the negative aspects and the poisonous nature of the job.
Well, now you've worked. Take me back when you were working as a police officer. I mean, you spent a full career practically in law enforcement. About what point did you really start seeing that breakdown within yourself and within your family, within your family unit, and just in the way that you were becoming to I guess maybe callous to just emotion, just turning everything off, I guess?
For me, it was right around the 7-year period. I served for almost 30 years, but right around that 7-year mark, I had gone through some very demanding, very complex cases. I was a detective after just 3 years on. So I was working as a detective. I worked a case where someone got taken up to Los Angeles and had their head and hands cut off, and it took 7 years to solve and get 2 Compton Crip gang members convicted.
Wow.
During that same time, I worked another case for 4 years, and we still have never found the victim's body, which started out just as a missing person case. And 4 years later, I was able to show, even without the body or a murder scene, a crime scene, that this guy killed her. And that was one of the first no-body murder convictions in San Diego County history. And these cases just were totally consuming, my life. That's all I thought about. That's all I cared about. It's the only thing that got me interested and excited. It's the only thing I really looked forward to. And I was really losing just a sense of myself and who I was, before I became a police officer. And I just slowly had stopped doing a lot of the things that kept me engaged with life, that kept me connected to my wife and to my stepgirls, without really realizing it. So at about 7 years on, I was at my stepdaughter's birthday party, and I just kind of had this realization, kind of this awakening that I had lost the ability to feel. I call it being emotionally dead inside, where you're just, you've lost that ability to really care. You're just indifferent to things. I didn't feel connected. I didn't feel engaged really with anything. The only thing I really thought about was work. And thank goodness I had that realization early on, because I realized that's not normal. We're human beings. We're emotional human beings that need to feel connected, that need to be engaged and involved with the people closest to us, that make life meaningful, through their love and their connection. And so that was kind of a wake-up call for me to start forcing myself to re-engage and start doing those things that I really love doing. Hiking, swimming in the ocean, just all kinds of stuff that kind of went by the wayside over the years.
Well, now you said that you're divorced. So did the divorce happen after that 7-year point, prior to, or?
After. We were married for 10 years and divorced. I ended up actually raising the youngest girl. She was 1 year old when I came in, and she was 11 when we got divorced. And the ex-wife just kind of took off and took the oldest kid, and I stayed with the youngest one. But by that point, even though the marriage had been irreparably harmed, I was kind of on my way of working on healing myself and kind of reestablishing who I was, and connecting with the purpose and the nobility of police work. I say all the time in my training as I go throughout the country, and I wrote in the book that police work really is a vocation of the heart, and the DNA of police work is service. And in order to serve, we have to care. We have to want to make a difference in people's lives, in our agency, with our colleagues, within our community. And if we ignore that aspect of policing, the essential heart of professional policing, which is compassion, selfless service and love, then we're almost inevitably going to be victims of the profession. And to me, that's what I found that has really led to healing and maintaining motivation, and kind of protected me over the years, was being driven by the heart to try to make a difference in people's lives as much as I could, try to pass on what I had learned to other officers as much as I could, to connect with the community, to try to creatively do things that really impacted people's lives and the professionalism of our agency. And that did more to help me than anything else.
Well, I want to sidetrack a little bit, because I heard something in what you just said that made me think about today's current events and the current nature of our society. When you said about the protecting the nature of the police work and all that, do you think that a lot of these issues that have always been human issues, like seeing the traumatic things we see and the bad stuff, because people don't call cops because it's a great day, they're generally calling because something's wrong. So seeing all these things, also having life issues, relationship issues, financial stress, compiling all of that, but also with the somewhat black eye that society has kind of put on law enforcement agencies, and certain things that have happened in the media recently, and in certain bad situations, has compounded that effect for officers, because they feel maybe that not only is it a tough job, but they're also the enemy, even more so than
Right.
before. Does that make
Yes.
sense where I'm going with that?
Yeah, definitely. But my response to that, Steve, is that those are totally outside of an officer's ability to control or really even influence in any way. I mean, there's going to be people that are always going to hate the cops. There's going to be a certain percentage of crooks that will kill you if they get a chance. And there's always going to be ingratitude from certain segments of the population. There's always going to be a lack of support from our own administration, from our chief and captains and even sergeants. We're never going to get compensated for sacrificing our lives day in and day out. That's just the way it is. And instead of trying to fight that and letting it just kind of eat us alive, what I've found is emotional survival really needs to become a way of life. and the principles of emotional survival, of serving with a compassionate heart, of doing everything you can to help manage and process stress and work through and overcome trauma and deal with things in a positive, constructive way instead of keeping everything inside or going off and drinking all the time or drinking yourself into unconsciousness, because that's the only way you can sleep. I mean, there's a lot of things we can do. We can't change what gives us stress and trauma, but we can change how we react to it, be more prepared for it, and do things to kind of help pick ourselves up and keep moving forward. Again, within that nobility of serving. No one else protects and gives life to people but the cops. And society needs us. With all of our problems and issues and everything else going on, the vast majority of people love the cops and want us there, and everybody needs us. And that's a basic human need, is to be needed. And how you defined fulfilling that need is really going to determine the quality of your life and of your career.
Wow, I love what you said about that. That's really good. That's a really good point about always. I mean, you're in a profession where inherently you're always needed. You may not always be wanted, but you're always needed.
Exactly.
Now, so to go back. So you started having you started noticing these things around 7 years. You obviously didn't have a book written. You didn't have a training program that you put together at that point. So what did you do to start addressing those things?
Well, I really became seriously interested in emotional survival and trying to help out my brothers and sisters that I've seen suffering so much. Several years later, when I was a lieutenant, I went to the FBI National Academy in Quantico, Virginia, and I took this class called Emotional Survival and Wellness Issues in Law Enforcement. And the first day we went around, introduced ourselves, and talked a little bit about why we wanted to take that type of a class. And there's a guy sitting out front. He was a police chief from some small town in Texas, and he told us his name, and he looked down for a while, and he picked up his head, and he said, I took this class because I've been a victim of my profession. And he started crying. And right there in a room full of lieutenants, captains, and chiefs. And that's when I really, we as a community of professional law enforcement need to start being real, acknowledge what this job can do to us, and look at what we can do to take control over our lives, to enhance our survivability, to increase our ability to cope and to be resilient. And that was really the emphasis for writing the book and developing our wellness program at my police agency, and now I do so, throughout the country as I travel and provide training and stuff. And most officers really haven't had this training. If they have, it's more likely they took it on their own. There's not a whole lot that's mandated in this field, and we're losing almost 200 officers to suicide year in and year out. So it was just over the years, seeing how the job affected me and many of my colleagues, it was just an inner drive to try to make that positive difference, not only within my agency, but within the law enforcement and first responder community, by trying to pass on what I know works, because just through trial and error in my own life and what I've seen in others, and that, again, giving people back the control to make it through this profession and make it to retirement healthy and well.
So do you find, you said something very interesting, and I don't know if you realized it you probably did, but about the guys that, will seek these emotional support and wellness support and survivability as far as that goes, that they seek it a lot of times on their own. Because administration, do you think it's just a culture that's always been one where it hasn't been addressed, so nobody's really addressed it, and that's why it's really just not become a standard part of police and first responder work? Or do you feel there's another reason why it's not addressed by administration?
Well, I think it's just been an inherent part of the culture forever. It's changing and things are getting better slowly, but we have really, Steve, so far to go. But when I started in 1985, if something happened to you, they told you to rub some dirt on it and get back out there, right?
Right.
The
Right.
thought of you needing to go talk to a trauma therapist, or you're having some type of psychological or emotional issues or problems, that's the last thing you would ever do, is to admit to that. And that's why over half of cops don't even make it to retirement. And that's why, 1 in 5 have PTSD and all the other issues and problems. Like I said, it's changing more and more because, I think police chiefs and sheriffs over the years are just getting tired of losing so many good men and women about a lot of stuff that really could be preventable if they embrace the whole concept of emotional survival and wellness training and character-based policing as being a way of life, a way to serve. And like I said, it is getting better, but there's so much more that we can do as agencies, as individual officers and first responders, to take better care of ourselves so we can take better care of each other and the communities that we serve.
Well, I know trying to change a culture obviously is going to create a lot of pushback. I use this phrase a lot. It's a quote by a philosopher. I believe he was from the early 1900s. And he said that all new ideas or concepts go through 3 stages. The first stage is that they're ridiculed. The next stage is that they're drastically opposed. And the third stage is they serve as self-evident. And I think we're at the point where it's going from the drastically opposed to the self-evident point, as far as mental health support and help in the first responder world. Because obviously it's, you can't turn on the news anymore, but without finding out about a police officer suicide, or just knowing about people that you work with or did work with that wind up losing their careers or worse because of these issues that aren't addressed. So do you agree? Do you think that we're at that point where it's starting to go from the opposition, the pushback, to, okay, let's shine a light on this because it's clearly a problem and we got to stop hiding it?
I think so. And that's just from the reality that there's so many devastated lives and careers in the first responders. And it seems to, be getting worse and worse. And, you mentioned a couple of things, but also I believe there's a lot of instances of excessive force, of officers sometimes turning bad and, even committing crimes sometimes. They're very, very minute minority, but it happens. But I think a big part of that is, as we go through our career, we lose the ability to deal with stress and to deal with life. And that coping threshold gets shorter and shorter and shorter before we end up losing it. And I'm a firm believer, I've seen it many times, that one of the main reasons why really good cops end up doing bad things or getting addicted to drugs and all kinds of issues and problems is they're not mindful of how the job is affecting them. And as they lose their ability to feel, to care, to be connected to their loved ones, to be connected to their character and the person that they were before they got hired, you become more and more indifferent, uncaring. You start to lose a part of your conscience.
Yeah.
And if you're a first responder and you lose a part of your conscience, it's probably not going to end up very well.
Yeah, your morality and your ethics tend to go out the window. I mean, I could speak from my personal experience. First day of paramedic school, if you had given me a crystal ball and told me, 12, 13 years later, I'd wind up shooting heroin and then driving an ambulance, I'd tell you we're crazy. But that's my story. That's what happened. And just like a police officer on day one of the academy, telling him, giving him a crystal ball and saying, hey, you might, 10 years from now, because of these things that aren't addressed, or the issues that arise, and that you might wind up in jail with the same guys you arrested. It's
exactly. There's an agency here in my county that in 1 year, this is about 6 or 7 years ago, they had two officers murdered in the line of duty in 2 separate incidents, 1 suicide, and they had 9 officers that were arrested for things like having sex on duty with prostitutes, to stealing, to accepting bribes, just all kinds of stuff. And maybe some bad people that shouldn't be cops slip through the cracks, but that really is so rare. primarily, for the most part, it's people unable to deal with the trauma and the acute stress of their profession over the years, and they lose that sense of right and wrong. They see themselves as victims, being victimized by the agency, by the community, by everyone and everything else. They've been divorced or having issues at home in their personal life, and they just can't cope anymore. And as they start not caring as much and start being more and more indifferent and calloused, that's what erodes your conscience.
Yeah, it sounds like the perfect storm. And you said a word earlier, and I wrote it down so I'd remember it, is the cumulative effect. It's not the effect of the very first call that you go to, but it's the effect of going to those kinds of calls all the time that piles
Absolutely.
up and brings down that threshold of being able to cope, like you talk about.
That's a really good point, Steve. I want to just throw in real quick that, we have nearly 1 in 5, almost 20% of officers suffering from post-traumatic stress. The vast majority of them never fired their weapon. In 30 years, I never fired my weapon on duty, ever. And the vast majority of officers who are suffering from post-traumatic stress are doing so simply from an accumulation of traumatic experience and acute stress just over the years. You don't have to be involved in anything crazy or multiple shootings or anything. It's just, we're vulnerable. Every one of us is vulnerable, no matter who we are, no matter what our background is, because we're human beings. And we fear, we suffer, we bleed just like everybody else. And the more that we try to pretend that we don't and that we're invincible, the more vulnerable we are to really suffer from all these negative aspects of the job.
Well, and that's goes along with another thing that I've been thinking about recently, and I have somebody coming on my show to talk about, I think next week, about trauma. Trauma is an individual thing because, for one person, that shooting could be the major trauma that breaks them. But for another person, it could be somebody talking bad to them. Like it's such an individualized thing. And that's what I think makes treating and addressing a little bit more of a gray area, because everybody brings their own unique circumstances and experiences to the table.
That's absolutely true. And, a lot of times I've seen this too, that someone will have a really significant critical incident, maybe a shooting or something, and they're okay. Maybe a few years go by and something that's really not that big of a deal happens, and it triggers this past trauma, this past memory. And all of a sudden they have, full-blown symptoms of post-traumatic stress and all kinds of issues and problems. I mean, the mind is so complex and mysterious. And what really post-traumatic stress is an injury. It's an injury to your brain. I don't know why they ever called it a disorder. It's not because you're weak or you have a mental illness or something, or that you shouldn't do police work. It's all about what happened to you, not what's wrong with you. And when we suffer trauma, either through an accumulation or a critical incident, potentially our brains, part of our brain that processes life, that processes events, gets injured. And that's why people with PTSD keep reliving things over and over and over and over again. And often they'll say, I'm stuck. My life is stuck. I can't get out of it. That processing ability has been injured. Until that's healed, they're likely to continue to suffer. Thank goodness there are some really good treatments for post-traumatic stress. The probably best, most effective one is called EMDR.
Absolutely.
That's the name of a type of treatment, and it is just absolutely phenomenal. I have countless stories I've heard of someone saying, I've only went one time, or I went 2-3 times, and my post-traumatic stress symptoms either went away, or more likely than not, they will end up at least reducing and mitigating. And it's a great treatment. If people can go to EMDRIA.org, it'll be a tab there that says find a therapist. You click on that, put in your zip code, and it'll bring up trauma therapists who are certified in EMDR. And it's really significantly saving lives day in and day out all over the country.
Well, myself being a personal I've used it. I've done EMDR myself, and I think it's a spectacular tool. And actually, I have a EMDR therapist and expert coming on the show next week, as a matter of fact, because that's
very good.
Yeah. So I mean, you and I are on the same wavelength as that goes. I want it now. We have about 10 minutes left or so. So I really want to get into what you're teaching. And what I picked out an excerpt from your book on chapter 6, on the first page of chapter 6. It's a quote by Aristotle that said that the ultimate value of life depends upon awareness and the power of contemplation rather than upon mere survival. And I really think that is such a fitting quote for this, because first you have to be aware that there's an issue. You have to come to that awareness. Otherwise, it's really hard you can't fix something unless you know it's broken or
absolutely.
damaged.
And yeah, exactly. And that's what I highlight in the book is kind of the first step towards emotional survival is self-awareness. Realizing what's going on, how the job may be affecting you. What are you doing to process stress? What are you doing for your own emotional wellness and survival? What are you doing to enhance those relationships closest to you that should be breathing life into your spirit? What negative emotions, what negative habits have kind of crept in that you can work at to try to reduce or eliminate? And what I like to tell officers is, because every officer always remembers the anniversary date of when they got hired. And this should happen periodically throughout the year, but at least once a year on your anniversary date when you got hired. Officers should really take a deep look at kind of the status of their health, their wellness, their relationships. Does the job still mean what it used to them? Have they lost motivation? Are they losing the ability to care? Are they having issues in their marriage? Maybe even ask your spouse. I mean, officers should really ask your spouse, hey, how have I changed since being a cop? And just listen to them, and they'll probably be talking for a couple hours. And a lot of times they don't feel comfortable telling us, hey, what's wrong with you? You're not right. They don't know what to do, so they tend to leave us alone. And that doesn't help us at all, because we don't know what's going on. We don't even know there's a problem. So, once a year to really engage with your spouse and your life partner, because we really need each other as our emotional survival lifeline. They need us as much as we need them to get through this career and make it to retirement, still married, happy, healthy, and well. So self-evaluation, self-awareness is absolutely essential, because as you said, you can't fix anything if you don't know what's wrong.
So let's take me through just some, it's a couple. I think you said there was 47 different strategies. Was that right?
There's over 40. Yeah.
Okay. Or over 40. Okay. So take me through a few, just give me like a couple of, like, to you that you feel are some of the most beneficial highlighted strategies that somebody can start doing right now if they wanted to.
Well, the most effective one is, as we discussed earlier, was remembering and actually practicing day in and day out each call to be driven by your heart to make a difference in people's lives. As I said, police work, any first responder job is a vocation of the heart, and you can't neglect that if you do to your own detriment. So, whether it's a kid who got his bike stolen or a homicide scene, try to make a difference. Have that mindset of how can I be helpful, beyond what it just takes to handle the call and go back into service. What can you do to try to be a little more compassionate, to be helpful, to find a need and try to fill it. And the more that you're doing that, and not just out in the community and with your calls for service, but also within your agency, how can you make the agency better? What can you do to promote more professionalism, better service within the agency? And when you're actively involved in trying to make things better for other people, that just naturally takes us out of ourselves, where we're focusing on other people instead of being self-centered and more selfish, because the heart of service is being selfless and giving a part of yourself to help others. And as we're doing that, we are healing ourselves. It brings in more positive energy. When we become negative, bitter, and angry, that saps the life out of you. It just totally drains all the energy out of you and your desire to really want to do much of anything. So again, serving with the heart, with compassion, is probably the most effective thing that you can do. Something else that I talk about is trying to be as engaged within the community as you can. For 24 years, I would go to every Christmas to some of the poor schools, and I would get 4 or 5 families who really wouldn't have a Christmas. I'd collect the money from our dispatchers and officers, and we'd buy all kinds of presents for the kids. We'd have the families come to the police department just before Christmas and give them a Christmas dinner, give them all the presents and stuff. And, those are the kind of things I remember now that I'm retired. And I'm glad I've done a lot of that stuff throughout my career. So I have those memories instead of spending in my retirement, like most first responders, trying to forget all the bad stuff. I've also set up a youth leadership camp where we'd take in high school kids, and cops would spend a week with them, teach them about ethics and leadership skills, community involvement. We'd go out in the community and clean up graffiti or other things. And you can see the impact things like that have, on kids. And you walk away with that feeling great. I mean, there's not a lot of opportunities for us to do really good, proactive, positive things in the community. So when you look for that need and you feel it, that just is a tremendous help for you to get through, all of the bad stuff. Now, there's many, many other things that we could talk about, self-improvement, working on character-based policing. Are you devoted more to the professionalism and nobility and honor of police work, or are you devoted more and dedicated more to yourself and your own selfish needs and desires? Integrity. Are you honest in absolutely everything you ever do at work and in your personal life? Are you selfless? Are you compassionate? All of those character traits that are within the heart of professional policing. It just takes us to be mindful of them, to, wake up each day and, okay, where am I needed most today? What's my wife need of me today? What's the chief need when I go in? What do my colleagues need? What's a member of the public need when they call the cops and need help? How can I best serve that? If that's your mindset and that's your practicing, what you're practicing day in and day out, and you're also taking care of yourself, you're eating right, you're making sure you're getting good sleep, you're exercising consistently. I mean, there's just so many things that you can do to take control back over your life, to build resiliency, and enable you to process a lot of the negativity and the evil that we deal with and make it to retirement and be okay.
Wow, that's all powerful, powerful stuff. So I definitely don't, I want everybody to read your book. So I don't want you to give away everything, because we want to give people a little taste so they can come and get it. And you're speaking, you go and offer these trainings pretty much all over the country, right?
I do. The book came out about 2.5 years ago. So since then I've been traveling, providing this training. I've been to about 17 states so far. I was just here in my hometown in San Diego presenting to the California Reserve Officers Association, and someone came up to me saying he had been shot years ago at work. Thought he was going to die. Suffered really bad from PTSD afterwards, and he said, "Thank you for doing this class. I mean, this is just one of the best classes I've had about teaching people how to deal with trauma and stress and just the nature of the job."
And I imagine when you get a guy that comes up and says something like that, it tells you that you're doing the exact thing you're supposed to be doing.
Makes it all worthwhile. I mean, and that's what I'm preaching more or less in the book, and is I'm trying to make a difference. I served for 30 years. I did what I could, and now I'm trying to do whatever else I can, because I love this profession so much. I mean, really, I look forward to going to work every single day for 30 years, even through the horrible, bad times. There's just so much good about police work and in what we do. And now I'm doing everything I can to try to make sure that my brothers and sisters serving are able to do so healthy and well, without being victimized by this profession that I love so much.
I love how you say, I'm going to try to remember that one, victimized by the profession, because that's a really, really good way of putting it. So I want you to share about, lastly, if you have, like, I always try to ask everybody this, like one last, going away tip or piece of advice that you could offer, and also where people can find you, to either invite, book you for an event to come and speak to their organization or agency, or to just connect with you, however they can connect with you and reach out.
Sure. To connect with me, to book me coming out, to provide training, to get a copy of the book. If people go to firstresponderwellness.com, that has everything right there. And just to kind of leave your listeners, as first responders, it's kind of a sacred duty of the trust that's been placed within us, from our country, from our community. And we're not any good to anyone if we're not healthy, if we're not well, if we're not taking emotional survival seriously, because the safety and the well-being of any community is intrinsically linked to the health and wellness of the officers serving it. And, they need us. This society needs us to be healthy, to be well, and to serve from our highest, from the compassion of a spiritual heart, and doing what we can to make things better.
Wow, perfect. That's a great way to close it out. So it's at firstresponderwellness.com. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. So anybody out there, please reach out to Dan, get a copy of the book, invite him out to your agency, or just, reach out to him and thank him for what he's doing. He really has inspired me to keep doing what I'm doing as far as this show and bringing on people like him. And so we can pretty much create a massive amount of change and what I like to call a revolution in this, not only in this country, but in society at large when it comes to our first responder brothers and sisters. So, Dan, thanks a lot for speaking with me this evening. It's been wonderful, and we'll be speaking to you guys soon out there.
Thanks so much, Steve. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Hey everyone, thanks again for listening. I really hope it'll help you or your loved one. If you get a chance, I really would appreciate it if you could head over to iTunes and Apple Podcasts and leave a review. It will really help me out in many ways. Take care everyone, and remember, you are not alone in your struggle.
I want to give a big shout out to one of our supporters, the Addictions Academy. The Addictions Academy is the world's foremost accredited trainer of addiction coaches, addiction counselors, interventionists, and international master addiction coaches, offering on-site training at your rehab or facility, live virtual classroom webinars, or on-demand classes covering an extensive availability of courses and certifications. Check them out at theaddictionsacademy.com or call Dr. Callie Estes and her team at 1-800-706-0318.
Thanks for listening to Rescue the Rescuer. For show notes and more, head on over to rescuetherescuer.com.
We are a part of the Mental Health News Radio Network.com. This show is produced by James Healy of RecoveryInnovators.com. If you have a message and want to start a show of your own, contact him and let him know that we sent you.